2000, 1999 or 2000. Um, and I didn't know, I kept looking for work, but then I was driven to write this book. I just, like, I was on these groups. They weren't even Facebook groups back then, they were Yahoo groups. And with people with these disorders, and they were like, well, everything's for kids, there's nothing for adults. And I was like, well, we're all adults. We each have a story. If we write them down and put them in a book, there'll be something for adults. And I went to this white big writers conference, and people thought I was crazy. They said, do you have a contract? Do you have an agent? I was like, no, no, no. I was just driven, and I just kept writing. And then I did, I just wrote. Back then it wasn't even, it was snail mail cover letters or query letters to different publishers. And I got a response from Jessica Kingsley, and it was like, we were cleaning out our Philadelphia office, and um and we found your letter, and we're interested in this project. Can you tell us more? And by then I had the book at least half written, so I did tell them more. And it ended up getting published in 2004. And then I moved up here to live with mom because she was getting older, and I didn't need to be in Rochester. And this was my second book. It's a cookbook because I started writing a column for I still do it today. I write a weekly column for the Adirondack Daily Enterprise, which is our local paper up here. And people wanted a cookbook. So this was self-published because you can't publish a cookbook unless you're a famous chef with a TV show. And then I also started writing poetry. And this book is also about being on the spectrum, and also my experience with God. Was published by Foothills Publishing. And it's called Different because, I felt very different. And these other two little books of poetry came out later. And these books are all on my website. And then in 2022, so back to, I started talking about mom's book, Good in the Midst of Evil. So when I was still living in Rochester, mom started putting down her story, and wasn't even on a computer, it was on a friend's word processor. And she wrote it first in English because for my cousins and me, and then she wrote it in Polish because her friends in Poland wanted to read it. And so then when I was living in Rochester, I joined a writing group, writing community there called Writers and Books. And I started taking like little workshops and writing memoir and other things. And I started putting together the two versions because they weren't the same. And at first we couldn't publish it. Then we published it under a different name and title. Hang on. This book came out in 2011, was published by a Canadian nonprofit, because and and then I started getting into, I've been trying to write for children and get picture books published. Um, I have a lot of stories, but nothing published yet. And so, the publisher that I was working with on some of my children's books, I told her about this. I actually sent her that book. And the problem with the first book is you couldn't really order it because it wasn't distributed. So you couldn't go to a bookstore and order and request it. And it wasn't on Amazon. So you could only get it from us. Um, or the organization in Canada, which nobody knew about, was called the Polish Jewish Heritage Foundation of Montreal. Um, so I sent it to Callie and she really liked it. And she said, let's publish this. This needs to be out there. And so we did a new, much nicer edition. I got more pictures from the Holocaust Museum um, to use in the book because the old one only had some family pictures. So this came out in 2022, and so did my book Loon Summer, which is poems and poems about loons, which are birds that we have here in the Adirondacks and also in some other parts of the Northeast, and I think Minnesota and Oregon also have loons. So I wrote poems, and somebody did the photos. The director of the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation. So both of these came out in 2022. So that's just about my journey to becoming a writer. And now I can say I'm an author and I'm retired and I don't have to tell people I'm unemployed. Sounds a lot better.
Can you
So,
read a part of that book, The Good in the Midst of Evil, for us?
yes, that's what I was gonna do next. And that's what I ended up doing at my last so I'm gonna read, had it bookmarked. Yeah, I have more time so I can read more. So this new edition also has some of my poems. So this chapter, um it's how they, so I'll just say a little bit. So the book starts before the war, and then goes into you know, so then they created the Warsaw ghetto, and then mom was in a secret school. They had schools in the ghetto. And then the chapter I'm going to start with is actually chapter 8, how they escaped from the ghetto. And then after that, she was in a few different, she was living in the country for a while, and then she was with a family, and then she was in an orphanage run by the Catholic Sisters of Charity, and then she was with an older woman for the last year of the war, and then it talks about how the war ended. She talks about I don't know if it's in the book or not, but when Pearl Harbor happened, it was like huge news, and it was like big, and it was like Wow, now the United States is in the war. Now there is hope because the US, because before that, all the European countries were falling one after another. Um, so anyway, so the chapter I'm going to start with, and I can read other ones too if you'd like. Um, but and I need my light now. It's called Escape from the Ghetto, and it starts with a poem I wrote, 1942. Handed the watch. The guard looked the other way. The man and two children walked through the gate. Solid gold with gold chain. My grandfather's pocket watch bought mom's freedom in 1942. And that's a poem I wrote in just 2 years ago. Escape from the ghetto. We creep stealthily through the morning shadows, slinking along the gray walls, hiding in doorways. No one is allowed to see us. As children, by now, we have no right to exist. All other children have been already deported. Only those old enough to work remain. The cold, gray city street is narrow and dusty, lined with crumbling houses. Patches of cardboard cover shattered window panes. The buildings are pockmarked with holes left by German bombs. What plaster is left is gray and peeling. Dirt and garbage cover the pavement of the narrow alleyways. Smells of refuse, urine, and dirt mingle with the sultry August air. In spite of the morning chill, I'm hot and sweaty under the layers of two dresses and a winter coat. Although it will be a hot, sunny August day when my father's 6-year-old brother and I left our home on Nalewki Street in the pre-dawn grayness. It was still cool. We arrive at the Vacha Gate on Zalazna Street at the crack of dawn. Dad stands by the gate and shoves us into a dark doorway. We huddle together, peering into the crowded street, trying to appear invisible. I'm scared. I wonder what awaits us. Is another chapter of my life coming to an end? I think about my life inside the walls, then about the past 2 years in our crowded apartment in the ghetto, the secret school, my school friends, playing with other kids on the dirty, stinky, crowded ghetto streets amid corpses covered with old newspapers. I had become used to living with the dangers of the ghetto. What will happen to us now? Will we be alive tomorrow? The uncertainty of that future is scarier than the ever-present danger of uniformed Gestapo. Columns of laborers dressed in gray, faded, tattered clothes move through the gate in both directions under the watchful eye of Jewish ghetto police with yellow armbands and navy uniformed Polish police. These are Poles who work inside the ghetto and Jewish laborers who work outside the walls. German gendarmes stand guard on each side of the gate. We wait for our guide, but he doesn't appear. The sun is now high, the sky blue. The day is getting hot. It shouldn't be like this. We should be playing outdoors in green grass. I think of the park I used to play in, the beautiful Krasinski Gardens, where I went for walks with Yanina before we moved to the ghetto. Dad looks more and more worried. A sharp pain shoots through my stomach, a reaction to the stress of the moment. I always react with stomach cramps in stressful situations. A man approaches my father, tall and blond, very handsome. He looks like a movie star. He has shoes without holes, socks, faded gray pants, and a light shirt that isn't tattered. He has been watching us for some time. He asks, "You want to get those children to the other side?" My dad wavers. He knows that in broad daylight we can't return home without running into either police or Gestapo. If by some miracle we did get there, then what? Sooner or later we would be discovered. Staying in the ghetto means certain death. But can he trust this stranger? He takes a good look at him. It could mean life or death for us. His face seems kind. After several seconds that seem like an eternity, he decides to trust his precious children to this stranger. Yes, my father makes an instant decision. We are still huddling in the dark, dirty doorway. I'm pale, hot and sweaty. My stomach hurts. Little Yurek, a small, dark, skinny kid, clings to me. He's only 6. He looks comical, clad in a dark woolen coat, pants, shoes, and socks instead of shorts and sandals on this hot summer August day. He is sweating, but is quiet, without complaints. He's scared without Mama in these unfamiliar surroundings and a strange state of affairs. The man replies, "I'll do it for a price." "How much?" The movie star names the price, but Dad doesn't have this much. The sum agreed on before with someone else was not so high. Dad isn't prepared to pay this much. He hesitates. What now? Does it mean an end? The stranger points to Dad's big pocket watch, an old-fashioned, solid gold watch with a gold chain. "Add the watch," he says. "It's done." Dad hands over the watch. At the last moment, my father whispers a warning in my ear. "Don't lead him to Aunt Ada's apartment. Lose him before that. Janina will wait for you at the bus stop at Kilinsky Square near Mirdova Street." "Janina," I smile. "My dear Nanny, it will be so good to see her." Everything happened so fast we didn't even say goodbye. These were the last words he said to me. This was the last time I saw my father. I'm proud that he put so much trust in me. The nameless stranger takes us by the hand, one on the right, one on the left. We enter the column of workers marching 8 abreast. At the gate, he pushes the watch into the SS guard's hand. The guard looks the other way. We are out of the ghetto walls and on the Aryan side. Is this all, I wonder? On the Aryan side, everything looks different. The gray buildings are still full of bullet marks, but the windows have glass rather than cardboard. The people hurrying by us, walking quickly down the street, don't look so starved. Even the German soldiers don't seem as fierce. There are no dead bodies covered with newspapers lining the pavement. No hungry, bloated, starving kids begging for any scrap of food. Once we're safely on the other side of the wall, the movie star says, "Let's get breakfast." We go down a few more steps into a little corner store and sit at one of 3 small round tables. We each get a ham sandwich on a Kaiser roll and a hot cup of tea. It had been 3 years since I'd had a sandwich like this. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. 40 years later, I asked my brother if he remembered anything from the events of that fateful day. Jurek, who was just 6, remembers only the sandwich. We both agreed that this was the best ham sandwich we'd ever had in our entire lives. After this memorable meal, the stranger walks us to the corner of Mirdova and Druga streets. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Anina waiting at the bus stop. Our eyes meet in silent understanding. My heart begins to race. Here is my dear Nanny. Now everything will be well again. I remember Dad's warning. This is the house. I point to the blank gray apartment house on the corner. We'll go up alone. Clutching Yurek's hand, we run up the front staircase. From the landing, I look down into the street. When I see the man leave, I take Yurek by the hand. We walk down slowly and join Yanina. Smiling, she asks, "Do you know the way to Aunt Ada's?" "Yes," I reply. "I'll go by Druga and Freda streets, past Grandpa's old house. Then take that route and go by yourself." Taking my brother's hand, she proceeds in a different direction. I went alone. At 11, I was scared, but I marched boldly to Aunt Ada's house on Nova Miasto Street. That evening, Aunt Ada sent the following telephone message to Mom and Dad. Both parcels arrived in good condition. So I can keep reading, or you guys can ask questions, or I can read a bit more. What parcels arriving condition?
Let's pause for some questions. If there's some students that want to ask questions. I have a question as far as the time that this is happening. Is this like before, after, or during concentration camps?
Okay, Mom was not in a concentration camp because children that went to concentration camps were just gassed. So if she had gone to a concentration camp, she wouldn't be here.
Right,
So
right.
she
But was
so
it?
they were starting to empty the Warsaw ghetto. I believe this was 1942, when they wait a few months before the Warsaw ghetto uprising, um when they, were smuggled out. And then she hid on the Aryan side for the rest of the war, and a very nice couple took in her brother, and he lived with them for the whole war.
Does your mom
Does
want?
that answer?
Yeah,
Hmm?
well, sort of. I guess, I mean, so there were concentration camps at the time that she was in the ghetto. There were still concentration camps in other places.
Oh yeah, yeah. They had started liquidating the ghetto, and most of the people from the Warsaw ghetto went straight to Treblinka, which was a death camp. It wasn't a concentration camp like
Right.
Auschwitz. Some of them, that could work were went to Auschwitz, but any kids or old people went straight to the gas chambers.
And so how did, I guess earlier in the story, how did she end up in the ghetto instead?
Okay, well, I can read that part. So they just rounded up all the Jews and locked them in this ghetto. I can go back, because I started in the middle of the book.
Yeah, and then
Um,
I don't know if your mom wants to add something. I saw her in the back. I don't know if she's getting up.
sure, did you want to add anything, Mom? Yes. It started like we were in the ghetto, but at some point there were announcements on the wall everywhere that everybody should have the parcel there, something for the next day, and connect to certain point. This was the point where the people, and supposedly we are getting to some labor camp, and people were actually going, thinking that they are going to work somewhere. I know that my father didn't believe Germans, and he was telling people, don't go, don't go, don't go, you are going to your death. But some people were very desperate and they did. And they went straight to Auschwitz, straight to the gas chamber. And as I say, my father didn't believe it. And he was right.
So he didn't go, obviously. Before you continue, can, Dr. Cooper, do you have any questions in your class?
They just wanted to know if you ever got to speak to your father again through letters, or was
I
that
never
the
see
last?
my father again. Yes. This was the last time I saw my father. On this gate, when he told me his last word, don't let this guy to Allah's house. So tell him how your father, so he my
Oh,
also father didn't believe what Germans were telling, that people should take things for one day and they are going to be relocated. People were going to Auschwitz thinking that they are going to be relocated to some labor camp. Yeah. So this is it. Tell him what happened to your father, Ma.
What's the last time you ever
Yeah.
What happened to
Okay.
him next?
This was the time, the rest of the war, my brother was in a very, very nice Polish family. They were keeping him, they were treating him. This was their baby children, the youngest child. And my father was, he was very attached to us. One day he said, I have to see my son. I have to see my son. He took the electric train and went to the suburb of Warsaw where those people that keep my brother lived. But he got into some different house and the Gestapo was looking for somebody. And my father was just on the wrong time in the wrong place. They say, what are you doing here? And my father couldn't exactly say what he was doing there. And they took you going with us. And my father got very scared and started to run. He knew that if he would go with them, they would kill him, they would send him to Auschwitz. So he started running and the Gestapo men just took one shot and killed him. So this was how my father died.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sorry to hear that. Any other questions? Miss Oliveira, Bowers, or Downing? No?
Okay, so would you like to hear the beginning of how they were?
Yeah, that would be nice. Let's hear
Yeah,
kind of how it started.
when they we have a memorable breakfast. Oh, that was when you came out of the ghetto, but let me get to and then we went at first we went on the other. No, the first place that I was sent to the country and I spent 2 years, less than 2 years, in the house of country teacher. Okay, so the war begins. That chapter is about how the Germans invaded and they were fleeing. But I'll start with winter 1939, 1940.
And then I have,
It's
sorry, to interrupt, the question I wondered,
1942, Yvona.
what is the,
I'm
the,
s-
the meaning of the title? What is the good? I know the evil, but what is the good?
Good in the midst of evil. Okay, no, I can,
Good. Yeah,
so the first edition of the book, the My Nine Lives, she named it that because she said, I'm like a cat. I've had, 9 lives, so many lives. But then when I looked up, if you go to like Amazon or someplace and you Google My Nine Lives, I mean, there is at least 20 books with that title. Um, so when we published this book, so when she published, so a friend of ours in Poland, a friend of mom's, he self-published her Polish version in Poland, and she called it There Are Good People. Because for everybody like mom who survived, there had to be not one, but many people who helped them. And all those people were risking their lives because just for giving a piece of bread to a Jewish person, you and your family could be killed. So it was like, so that Polish title was There Are Good People. And so this, I called it Good in the Midst of Evil because, of course, there was a lot of evil, but there were people who helped. And so there was good in the midst of evil. So does that answer your question?
yes, thank you. Do you want to continue?
Um, and so winter 1939, oh, I guess you can't see that. Maybe you can. Winter 1939, 1940. The winter of 1939 was the coldest in many years. Hang on, I need my light now. The whole family, all 8 of us, huddled in the big room next to the ceramic coal stove. Yanina tried to keep going. It was fairly warm near the stove, gradually colder away from it, and freezing near the window. There were shortages of everything, especially fuel. There was no longer hot water in the house. New rules and regulations began to take effect. Proclamations were posted prohibiting the ownership of radios, guns, motorized vehicles, all under penalty of death. In addition, Jews had to give up fur coats and bicycles for the German army. I wondered why the German soldiers needed my little bike and mom's fur coat. These rules meant persecution of Jews and harassment of Poles. She was like 8 at the time, so she'd just gotten a bike the summer before and was learning how to ride it. The 4 of us slept in one big room, the Malachinskis and the others. So the part I didn't read, so they had they tried to escape Warsaw and they got almost to the Russian border and then they turned back because the kids were sick and stuff. And mom's mom, my grandmother was frantic and they went back home. And when they went back home, mom's aunt that she didn't know she had, um, they were traveling. She was a dentist and he was an officer in the Polish, I don't know, bigwig, whatever, in the Polish railroad, and they were moving from um Poznan, which is in the northeast of Poland, to Toruń, and the war started, and their train got bombed, and they lost all their possessions, and they escaped and went to she went to her sister's house, which was my grandmother. Um, and so when they got home from their little adventure trying to go east from the Germans, they found the Małachinskis um in their home. Um, my cousins were both older than I. I was 8, Ilka 12, and Zdzich 15. They wouldn't play with me, looked down on me, and treated me like a bothersome kid who didn't understand anything. My brother, Yurek, got lots of attention. At the age of 3, he was the baby of the family. Because of my aunt's mixed marriage, my cousins were brought up in the Catholic tradition, about which I knew nothing. I felt suspended between the grown-up world in which to which Zdzich almost belonged, and to which Ilka aspired, and the children's world in which I had been firmly planted until now. The whole concept of Jewishness or Christianity, racial, national, or religious identity was completely foreign to me. I would have to learn quickly, and the lessons wouldn't be easy. The weather was bitter cold, and the streets were dangerous. We didn't go out much. Schools were closed. No schooling whatsoever was allowed for Jewish children, only elementary education and trade schools for Poles. Aunt Ada tried to teach us at home. Zdzich was in high school, Ilka in 6th grade, and I in 3rd. Later, all kinds of illegal underground schools, even universities, were organized. This first winter under German occupation, however, was too traumatic. Aunt Ada wasn't in the mood to teach us, and we weren't eager to learn. On one particularly cold day in March, we heard the metallic clang of heavy boots with reinforced soles approaching the house. Then a loud pounding on the door. Before anyone had a chance to open it, uniformed Gestapo soldiers barged into the house. Janina grabbed Yurek and me, pulling us into the back bedroom. As we huddled in fear, I heard a barrage of angry, barking voices, shouting in German and banging coming through the wall. Then I heard a loud crash. When it was all over, I came out to the dining room and saw what had happened. The crash I had heard was one of the Germans hitting the glass top of the dining room table with the butt of his gun. The glass shattered. There goes my mom's pride and joy, the beautiful mahogany dining set, I thought. But no one said a word. We counted ourselves lucky to have survived this first encounter with our new rulers. They only broke the glass tabletop, not anyone's skull. After this, the family decided it wasn't safe to stay together any longer, and Aunt Ada, Uncle Michał, my cousins, and my dear nanny, Janina, moved to an apartment on Nowe Miasto Square. Of course, Aunt Ada's Jewish heritage was a well-kept secret. We all realized that if the family was to survive, they couldn't be identified as Jews. Since Jews weren't allowed to own businesses, my father's leather franchise was sold. The Małachinskis opened a little boutique with the proceeds. Janina stayed with them and was employed as a store clerk. Spring arrived, but it was a gray spring. Many restaurants and cafes were closed, as were many shops and businesses. Much of the city's business had been owned by Jews and so ceased to exist. The few restaurants that remained open all posted notices barring entry to Jews. The better restaurants posted signs that they only served Germans. The secreted, forbidden radios brought news of the surrender of one country after another, Denmark and Norway in April, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands in May, France in June. The mood in the city was dark and bleak. Everyone wondered how long the horror would last. The birds returned and flowers bloomed, but the gardens were unkempt and riddled with weeds. Although the weather was warm, few ventured out in the street any more than was absolutely necessary. The women dressed in drab clothes and ceased wearing makeup. My parents no longer went to the theater and opera. There were no more social gatherings or card parties in our home. My parents were too involved in keeping the family afloat to worry about my good or bad manners. My little 3-year-old brother required much more of Mama's time. There was no Yanina to help her. I was left alone. No one paid attention to me. For the first time in my life, I was unhappy. My life completely changed. No longer was I the pampered little girl playing in the park under the care of her nanny. I missed Yanina. I felt closer to her than to my own mother. My beloved Yanina lived somewhere else and worked in the family store. No one took care of me. Left alone, I felt abandoned. I didn't know how to deal with my new freedom. I also began to learn that I was different, that I was Jewish, and some of the courtyard kids weren't. They thought I was worse than they. I thought I was better. I knew that my cousins, Irka and Stich, were somewhere in between. I still didn't totally grasp the concepts of ethnicity, Jewishness, or Catholicism. That summer, we stayed in Warsaw and didn't go to the cottage in the country. The aunts and uncles with whom we had spent past summers moved on and were living somewhere else. And then into the ghetto. Maybe I should have. So these are some pictures. Um, the fall of 1940 brought new German reprisals. Already, adults and teens had to wear the star, a label that allowed them to be beaten or robbed with no retaliation to the perpetrators. Fortunately, this didn't pertain to me because I was only 9. The next stage of the increased intolerance and prejudice came in October of 1940. Now all Jews had to live in a special part of the city, the Jewish ghetto. This small area held all the Jews from Warsaw and the surrounding countryside, almost 500,000 people. It was overcrowded from the beginning and became worse with time. Almost overnight, we found ourselves in a crowded prison. A huge 9-foot-high brick wall was erected around the Jewish quarter, an area of about 50 city blocks in the northern part of Warsaw, with barbed wire and shards of broken glass on top. At first, the Warsaw ghetto was composed of 2 parts, the main section and the small ghetto. Each was walled separately, connected by an overpass. Anyone, even 1/8 Jewish, was considered a Jew. Of course, Aunt Ada and her family defied the orders. She was very cautious, avoiding anyone who may have known her in her youth. For many years, they had lived in Western Poland, so they weren't known in Warsaw. They stayed in their apartment in Nowe Miasto and officially didn't know us. After all, there had been little contact between the families since she ran off with her Gentile husband, Michał Moraczynski, and Grandpa renounced her. The creation of a ghetto came as a huge shock to me. My small, stable world was no more. I could no longer visit Aunt Ada and Janina. My school, the beautiful park where I played as a child and walked with Janina, all stayed behind on the other side of the wall. Why had we been imprisoned? What crimes had we committed? Religion was never discussed at home. Ma, put your hearing aid in so it doesn't whistle. Why had we been imprisoned? What crimes had we committed? Religion was never discussed at home. I really hadn't known that I was Jewish, or even what that meant. I felt that I had been imprisoned without having done anything wrong. My awareness of racial and religious identity grew quickly. I now knew that we were Jews and what this meant, and began to resent it. My reaction was that, as a child, being punished unjustly. Why am I being punished for something I didn't do? I didn't choose to be a Jew. We quickly became accustomed to living under German occupation, our very existence depending on finding ever better ways of bending the senseless rules, cheating the Germans, and eluding or evading the authorities. As children, we learned quickly. I wasn't conscious of living in continual danger and fear. It was simply our reality. The ghetto motto was a modus vivendi, a way of living with the Nazi horror. Inside the ghetto walls, everything was punishable by death. The smuggling of food, listening or owning a radio, the possession of textbooks. Life itself, it seemed, was illegal and punishable by death. Special Gestapo units trained in extreme cruelty guarded the few gates. You needed special permission to go out or come in. There was little contact with the outside world.
Thank you.
I
What
can-
I want to do now is I want to take like about 5 minute break and let the students process kind of like the story.
Sure,
And then
sure.
ask each class, there's three different classrooms, to come up with at least one question. And then
Okay.
we can do a little Q&A now. Probably at the top of the hour, so in about 5 minutes. Is that, and then give us a little break.
Sure. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I wanted to tell you as well that you mentioned Pearl Harbor. Our school is about a 5 minute drive from Pearl Harbor. We're very close to Pearl Harbor where we are right now.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we'll come back in 5 minutes and then hopefully we'll have at least 3 good questions from the students.
Sure.
A fascinating story, and it echoes with some of the things that were in the story that they just read from The Giver. A lot of the things, especially taking away books, taking away information, access to things that you know, she had to go through as a child. It's exactly what they just read about.
Okay.
All right, we'll come back in 5 minutes.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. We have some questions now. I saw one of my favorite students in the hallway, and he had a good question. But let's go to these questions. So there's some questions that the students put in the chat, through their teachers.
Oh.
One of the questions is, let's see. Does your mom have any flashbacks of the trauma that she encountered at that time in the past?
I think she does, and she has been drawn to reading a lot of stuff about the Holocaust, which is kind of weird, but yeah, and she does. She has dreams, and she's coming, so I'll let her answer.
Whatever the question then I will be answering.
And
I just have to sit steady.
the question that the student I saw in the hallway was wondering is about in the ghetto, in the story where you read that there were dead bodies, or there were corpses with newspaper covering them. Were there any, like, what was the youngest? Were there any children that in the ghetto that were killed, or how old were
Oh, yeah.
yeah, okay.
Tell them about the kid.
Every school's a secret.
Yeah, tell them about the kid who was the German policeman that you saw take the little boy and smash his head against.
Yeah, correct.
She dreams about that a lot.
This is the art of living in the ghetto, this thing. All the schools were secret. If you are reading the book, if I would be found on the street with the book in my arm, I would be killed. Reading the book was practically under the death penalty. Teaching, learning, it was all under the death penalty. I was in school, which Yvona told you, but this was the secret school.
Right, well, they wanted to know if you
Tell them about
a
the
lot
kid.
of kids or.
And tell them about the kids who
that
used
were
to
dead.
beg for
Okay,
food
let
and
me
you give them
finish.
sandwich.
Let me finish. I saw these children on the street playing in the gutter. There was no garden. There was no places to play. Once I was coming between my lessons that was secret. If somebody will catch me with the book under my arm, then death penalty. Once I was coming from the school and I was going on the street, and there was like the school and the dirty street and the children that were playing in the gutters. And I was on the other side of the street. There was a little boy playing in the gutter. And the German comes on the motorcycle in the street. He stops the motorcycle, grabs the little kid and smashes his head on the wall. And it was just like I was on the other side of the street. I couldn't catch my breath. It was just so horrible. There was blood drain on the wall. And the German just got back on the motorcycle and went out. And 40 years later now, when I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking of it in a little bit different way. This guy, this German, the war will end and he will come back to his own family. How is he going to face his own children and his own wife after what he did during World War II? Anyway, this was the reality of living in the ghetto.
Okay, so here's a couple of questions that are the last two questions I just got. do you still practice your Jewish faith? And then do you also, the other question is, do you think that kids should be educated about the Holocaust?
I never practiced my Jewish faith. I was never religious. There was no religion in my house. There is never a religion in my house still. So
So her family was very secular because the part of the book I didn't read, at the beginning, all her aunts, like four of them, married Gentiles, and they never. Her family was very secular, um, and they didn't celebrate the holidays, or she had really no concept that she was Jewish and somebody else was not Jewish
yeah,
Right.
until she was locked in the ghetto.
when they get close the ghetto, this was my reaction. We are Jewish. Why are we Jewish? And on the other is not Jewish, and Ilka is not Jewish, and this of my friend is not Jewish. Why are we Jewish? Let's be somebody else.
Right.
And
Yeah.
what was your other question?
Do you think children
Oh.
should be educated about the Holocaust?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there was a movie, a documentary, um, oh gosh, on our PBS station about a couple weeks ago, and it was about the Holocaust, but then it was about Sudan and China and Rwanda and all these places. And yeah,
Yeah,
so
they're all related. Yeah,
I wish you guys could see that. I'll try to get the title of it.
that would be great.
Um
I'll follow up with you because I was gonna ask that type of question too about, you know, could this happen again? And obviously it does, and it has, and it is.
mhm.
Let me look for another question.
I was in Yugoslavia when the war started there, and it was the same thing. And I remember going to with some of the students at the school I was working at. It was a college, and the guy was trying to ask um my friend if he was Croat or Serb, and he didn't want to answer. He was like, "I'm Yugoslav,"
Right.
and the other guy wouldn't accept that. And
I know what you mean. When I was in high school, I had a friend, she was Jewish, but she would say, I'm American. I'm not
yeah,
Jewish, I'm American. And that was her belief. That was
mhm.
her identification. So what kept your mom going? And then this is a question from the students. What kept her going? And also, did she ever see her brother again? Or did she ever, like everyone had to separate to survive, but did they ever get to reconnect later on? So that's really,
Oh, we are close.
Yeah, they're coming up to see the eclipse. They live in New Jersey. My her brother and his wife.
oh, good. So they're still alive and they still
Yeah,
visit. Oh,
yeah.
good. What about the cousins and everyone else? Like when you had to separate in the ghetto later on, did you ever see those family members back?
Well, a lot of them were killed, right, or perished. But yeah,
They
most of
married, they are different people. The generation that I remember is not alive anymore.
yeah, but
Most of them.
your cousins and your aunts and uncles, a lot of them perished, right?
Yeah. I mean, my cousins, okay, the whole family, like my father came from the family of 7. And of course, I have a lot of aunts and cousins. They are no longer alive. I have aunts and cousins that died in the concentration camp. that were rounded in the ghetto or somewhere else, sent to their death. So this is it.
Another question.
Whoever survived,
Yeah, for you to survive, it sounds like everyone had to go their own way. And
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, when you go to the doctor and they ask you, what did your family die from? And she says World War II, you
Right.
know, because they want to know, you know, did they have cancer or heart disease or, you know, stuff
Yeah.
like that. But
Your family history.
yeah,
So as a child, what was your mom's biggest struggle and like, how did she overcome that? Like, I know, of course, surviving the Holocaust is a big struggle, but in the smaller story, you know, what inside of that story, what was their biggest struggle and how did she overcome that?
inside of that story, this is what I learned. People are people, and they are not Jews, Catholics, Muslims, Chinese. We are all people. And nobody is better because who he is. You might be better because of what you do, not because where you were born. This is my lesson from World War II.
That's a good lesson. Thank you.
my mother became very enterprising because before the war she wasn't.
Before World War II, she was a wife,
Yeah,
and the family was pretty well to do, and she was very elegant. She was going to the clubs, she was going to the parties, and then the war came, and she was a different person, and all of a sudden my mother was very enterprising, kept us alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you said your mom likes to do research about that time, the Holocaust, and read more information. The question the student has is it hard for you to relive this story as like we talk about it today and as you went through the writing the book, is it hard to relive it?
What?
is it hard to relive it?
Yes, it is. It is hard. I have sometimes nightmare about it. I have nightmare of the ghetto street and this German soldier who grabbed this little kid and smashed his head in the wall.
I was wondering with the gold watch, what do you think would have happened if your dad didn't have the gold watch? Did you ever think about that? I'm sure you did.
Well, I don't know. I think that the guy will take the money that we have. My father will give him maybe a few more, maybe every money he had. I don't believe that if it wouldn't be gold watch, we wouldn't be alive. But I don't know.
Yeah. It could have been
This
anything.
is my wishful thinking.
You were saying earlier today that it would have been nice to find that guy, like after the war. Nobody thought
I
of it
never saw him again.
because she never saw him again, or she thinks there was a friend of hers who was also smuggled out. They didn't meet until after the war,
Yeah.
but she thinks the friend has passed now, but she
I was
thinks
trying to talk to her and trying to describe how the guy looked, and she told me that she thinks that it must be the same guy that helped her.
So are you
So-
still in contact with any, sorry. Are
are
you in
we in contact?
contact with any other survivors? I know you said you see your brother, but like that friend that was there and then later on you saw her, do you still have contact with any survivors, like Holocaust survivors now?
Well, we did. A lot of them have passed away.
Right.
like the friend that was living in Florida, she's gone.
No, I'm 93 now, so.
And her other friend in Boston, she was also smuggled out of the ghetto, and she lived in an orphanage for the rest of the war, Stasha, and she died a couple years ago. And Nina and Nurek Zaharia,
Yeah.
you know, so
Not dead anymore. Yeah, not alive anymore.
yeah. When I was in high school, in Central New York, there was what I used to call the Society of Polish Jewish Doctors. There was no such real society,
No.
but it was like these friends of my parents that were all my stepfather was a doctor, and we knew all these other, and some of them had numbers, like from Auschwitz on tattooed on their arms. So, but most of them have passed away now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the
Hello?
Holocaust survivors, if they survive, they are not alive anymore anyway.
There was a guy here, they made a movie, Return to Auschwitz, and then she wrote this book, The Missing Star, about him and his wife. And he passed away just a few months ago. But he was like 96 or 98 or something like that.
Um, Dr. Cooper, who's our English teacher, she wants to know if you can read one more chapter,
Sure.
please.
Would you like to hear about the secret school, or would you like me to continue with into the ghetto where I left off, um about, or something else?
The secret school would be great.
Okay, sure, yeah. That was actually the one I was gonna originally read, and then I decided to start with the other one. So here's a picture of children on the street of the Warsaw ghetto. This is a photo I got from the Holocaust Museum. When we were doing the second edition of this book. In the ghetto, all schools were forbidden. The efficient Germans saw no purpose in teaching a society that was to be exterminated. Teaching, learning, or owning a textbook were all crimes punishable by death. Since Jewish culture valued education, secret schools began to spring up inside the walls. As the oldest child, I was the obvious candidate from our new extended family. I had finished second grade before the war. My parents attempted to cover third grade during the winter of 1939-1940, though I completed little of the curriculum. They were unable to find a third or fourth grade class for me. Mr. Zenon Epstein taught two classes, the fifth and sixth grade, in two shifts. Under the condition I could keep up with the curriculum, I was permitted to start fifth grade in Mr. Epstein's school. There were no textbooks or other teaching tools. Paper and pencils were scarce. There were no classrooms, no school building. For our safety, school was held in the overcrowded apartments, each day at a different location. There were no other teachers. There was no school administration. There was only our small group of 20 students in two classes and Mr. Epstein. Yet it was the best school I ever attended. Mr. Epstein looked more like a Ukrainian peasant than a Jew. Short, square, stocky, with a white face, piercing blue eyes, pug nose, and a completely bald head. We nicknamed him Bald Mountain. He was talented, gifted, and dedicated. We were his children, his family. During all of my school years, I've never had a better teacher. A bachelor in his 30s, he lived with his sister and her family. His small earnings helped keep his nieces and nephews alive. He was not an Orthodox Jew, neither were any of the students. Religion and Jewish history were not part of the curriculum. It was definitely a good Polish private school in the midst of the Jewish ghetto. Those who could afford to pay did. Those who had less gave whatever they could. We covered all the main subjects: history, geography, Polish reading and writing, math and science. Physical education, music, and art were passed over as unimportant. We loved him dearly. Since our apartment had 2 large rooms, school was often held in our home. He became our family friend and spent much time with us. He adored my little brother, who at age 5 was reading fluently and trying his capabilities at solving math problems. As a teacher, he recognized Yurek's high intelligence. I did well in school. Once, when I had not written the essay which he had assigned for homework, he called on me to read. I stood in front of the group and boldly read my essay from a blank piece of paper, making it up as I went along. I must have been making a bit too much eye contact because he came and stood behind me, looking at the empty page. I got an F on the assignment, but he relayed the story to my parents. For weeks, I heard how smart I was for being able to do this. I loved to read and borrowed many books from the ghetto's secret libraries. Books transported me to a different world, a world without walls, where people were free and happy. That world included woods, meadows, green trees, flowers. My world was gray, consisting of brick ruins and dirty streets filled with starving beggars and newspaper-covered corpses. Books allowed me to momentarily forget the gray, drab ghetto existence, the hunger, the crowded streets, the bustling mass of people, the stench of garbage and death. Mr. Epstein's class learned together, played together, and roamed the streets together. My life revolved around my secret school and my friends, the gang of kids with whom I roamed the streets and played games in the wreckage. My closest friend, Yasha, was tall and dark, deliberate, decisive, practical, both feet planted solidly on the ground. Leon, a gangly kid, tall, skinny, blonde, with a nose and arms and legs too long for his small size. We explored together the great outdoors, which in the ghetto was bleak and gray. There was nothing green or alive. The starving populace ate any living thing. There were no parks, trees, flowers. We played in a world of concrete and asphalt. We had no bikes, balls, sleds, skates, or other toys. The winter was bitter cold and very snowy. The snow-covered, bombed-out houses became our winter playground. One such house was across the street from us. We would slide down the snow-covered hills of rubble on anything we could find, like old wooden boards or leather school bags. Since we didn't have mittens and boots, I ended with frostbitten fingers and toes. Our parents were so busy trying to keep us alive, they set few rules or boundaries, and we were allowed to roam freely. The ruined, bombed-out houses had old cellars with entrances so small that only thin kids could squeeze through. Inside, they were full of nooks, crannies, and tunnels that became our secret hideouts and passageways. One day on the way to school, we found one such cave. Leon led the way through a tiny crack in the rubble. His thin, wiry body squeezed easily through. Look, he called out to the rest. We came running. Yasha was next to crawl in. Her dark eyes were wide in her round face when she saw the treasure. This cellar was full of beads in many sizes, shapes, and colors, pins, and other remains of custom jewelry. It must have once been a jewelry store. That summer, the girls in our group made and sold various bead ornaments. The discovery expeditions kept us busy, and this close-knit peer group became more important than my family. My childhood was over. Papa no longer swung me around on his knee. I was no longer Daddy's little princess. During those 2 years in the ghetto, I went from 9 to 11 and grew up quickly. I became independent, almost a teenager at the age of 10. One of our favorite pranks was sliding down the stair railing from the 5th floor all the way to the 1st without stopping. We would also ring someone's doorbell, then quickly run 2 floors down and listen to the terrified housewife. Seeing no one, asks, "Who's there?" Yet at the end of every ramble, there was the ever-present brick wall with barbed wire and shards of glass on top, a constant reminder that those games and adventures took place inside a prison. I always wanted to know what the world was like on the other side. The constant danger, personified by green uniformed German SS, stalked us on every corner. We soon learned to instantly make ourselves invisible, disappearing into the narrow doorway. During one of our escapades, I watched an SS guard on a motorcycle drive up to a house where little kids were playing. Okay, Shoulder told you that story. Mr. Epstein could keep our band united and orderly. From him, we learned much more than reading, writing, and math. We learned courage, friendship, and solidarity. Much later, after the war, I met Mr. Epstein again and learned about his incredible escape from Auschwitz. The year was 1945. I was in high school. Mom worked at the Jewish Agency on Market Street in Warsaw. After school, I often stopped for a free meal in the employee cafeteria. One day, the door opened to reveal an old, short man with a round face, bright blue eyes, and a completely bald head. I thought, this is impossible. I must be dreaming. I was in shock. When I found my voice, I yelled, "Mother, come quick! It's Mr. Epstein!" I ran to get my mom and started pulling her by her skirt. My dear old teacher from the ghetto was happy to see us. "You're alive! At least someone who's alive." His whole family, as well as most of his students, were all dead. At last, he had found me, my brother, my mother, all there and alive. It's as if he had at last found someone from his former family, someone close and dear from another life. That evening, at our one-room apartment on Wileńska Street, I learned his story. When they started the liquidation of the ghetto and everyone went to the Umschlagplatz, My whole family, my sister with her children and I, packed our bags and went too. After a long, hard journey in the cattle train, we were ordered to get out and get undressed. Everyone went. My family, Leon, that tall, thin blonde with the long nose, everyone went. I too exited the train and got undressed. My shoelace was knotted up. I couldn't untie it. I remembered as Mr. Epstein spoke how exact and pedantic he was. He couldn't just slide his foot out and leave his shoe. He had to untie it neatly. Mr. Epstein continued, "That's how I found myself at the very end of the big mass of naked people. The SS were rounding everyone up like a herd of cattle. I saw my sister and the kids and Leon in front of me in shock. They could tell something awful was about to happen, but they were too stunned to react or do anything. They were going like sheep to the slaughter. Suddenly, I found myself alive. The SS, I'm sorry, suddenly I found myself alone. The SS were in front of me, keeping the human mob together. Somehow, I escaped their notice as I stood at the edge, naked, with one shoe on and one shoe off. And back of me was the cattle train that had brought us there. The cars were open. I looked behind me. Those train cars were full of old clothes. I don't know why, but I jumped into the train and buried myself in the clothes. After a while, the German soldiers closed up the train cars and the train began to move. I'm not sure how long I traveled like this. It must have been days rather than hours. The train doors were opened by Russian soldiers who found a naked Jew in the last stages of dehydration and exposure. The story of my escape from the gas chambers was too hard for them to believe. The irony was that, in spite of my condition, I was taken to be a spy. After long court proceedings and debates, however, they let me go. Mr. Epstein now lived in the city of Łódź. He had come to Warsaw hoping to find some survivors from his family or friends. At this time, at the end of the war, everyone who was still alive would register with the Jewish agency. My mother was the witness of many family tragedies, as well as many miraculous survivor stories. Everyone who made it through alive had his own miracle story. Mr. Epstein didn't return to teaching. Instead, he worked in an office. I could not comprehend this. He was such a talented, dedicated teacher. In his school, with no books, I learned more than ever, not just academics, but courage, friendship, solidarity, how life is to be lived. In spite of difficult, impossible circumstances, we lived and learned that now he was shuffling papers in some office rather than teaching was hard for me to grasp. He changed his name to Zenon Gołaszewski. He visited us a few times. We lost touch with him when he emigrated, as did many lonely souls. He went to seek happiness in the world. His entire life was in ruins. Everyone he loved was dead, cruelly murdered. Perhaps because of this, he couldn't bring himself back to teaching.
Thank you so much.
Hmm?
Thank you so much for reading and
Oh,
sharing.
you're welcome.
We're gonna have,
Thanks, Mom.
what'd you say?
She said she loves the way I wrote it.
Did you know? Just from my heart.
Yeah, it is just from your heart.
It is. It's a very touching story.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
The kids all, can we turn on our mics and get the kids to say thank you?
And
And
thank
for
you.
spending your time with us today. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
And
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, this was great.
I'll follow up with an email and, you know, we really appreciate it. And it was, I know the students got a lot out of it. We all learned a lot and we really appreciate your sharing your story and your mom as well, especially.
Yeah, and the book is available, you know, anywhere books are sold.
Great. Thank you so much.
And you can get information about all my books on my website.
Yeah, I have your website. It's a nice website.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye, Yvona. Bye, Dana. Aloha.
Aloha.